Okay, hello, this is Senate Government Operations. It is Wednesday, February 10th, and today we're going to continue our discussion on elections issues. And what I have on the list is talking about candidates, the candidates' requirements. There is a suggestion that we limit the number of JPs that the party can nominate, then talking about the primary and then the general election, and then the mail out of ballots. So is that where everybody else is on this day with this? Good, thank you. All right, so, and I have to say, we've had some spirited discussions up to this point and some differences of opinions. And I'm happy that we've had them. Some of them have ended up in agreement with everybody, and some of them have not. And when we get further on, I'm going to, I want to start on these issues now, but when we get further on and talking to Amron about what to draft up for us, I'm going to bring up a topic that we had talked about before, but I think that there might be some changes in our committee understanding of them and support or non-support for them. So I'm going to just bring them up later, but for right now, I'd like to get started. And the first thing we have on our list is the requirement that candidates have to run for office have got to have voted in all elections for which they were qualified. That was the suggestion that was given to us. And Will, would you share with us what we have right now as required residency requirements for candidates, other than we know that in the Constitution, for House and Senate members, you have to have lived for 2 years in the state of Vermont, and for the 1 year preceding the election in the district which you hope to represent. And for governor and lieutenant governor, and I believe treasurer, you have to have lived in the state for 4 years preceding the election. That it says resided in, it doesn't say what resided means. So Will, can you share with us what we think resided means at this point?
Sure. You asked me two different questions. First, you asked me if I know about any residency requirements other than those. And
yeah.
that answer is no. Those are the only residency requirements I'm aware of.
Okay.
Aside from, I would note that candidates for local offices have to be registered voters in the municipality. As far as residency, you asked what you all think is the residency requirement, and I'm not sure. What I would say is that term is just used in the Constitution, that they have to be a resident for that long. It's not defined any further in the Constitution. And as far as I'm aware, there's no direct further definition of that in statute that's directly tied to the residency requirements in the Constitution for people serving in those offices. I think that if this matter were to come before a court, it is more likely than not that the residency definition that a court would turn to would be the residency definition in Title 17 for purposes of voter registration. Just because it's the most closely related as far as subject matter. There are other residency definitions, like we've said, scattered throughout the statutes. I would think they would turn to the one in Title 17 that I provided to you this morning, Senator White.
Do you want to remind me what chapter, where that is?
17 VSA 2122.
2122. Yes, that's what I'm was asking you to share with us.
Sure.
So did everybody get that?
No, I haven't looked at it, but isn't it I thought for the legislature, it was for 2 years. You had to live in Vermont for 2 years and 1 year in the district. You're running.
That's what I said.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
But what is it for statewide? And it's nothing for people who are running for Congress, right? There's no residency requirement. Is there?
The Constitution, we don't control federal offices anyway, so.
I realize, but it's just good for us while we're thinking about these to know what they all are.
I have no idea what the federal one is.
But for statewide, then, Will, can you just, is that, I'm just looking at 2121.
No, it's in the Constitution. And
Right.
It's page 15 of the little Constitution, number 15, section 15 says 2 years for House and Senate. The most recent year has to have been in the district that
Right.
you want to represent. And section 23 says governor and lieutenant governor 4 years, and I'm not sure where it says treasurer, and the other statewide, there's none. It's just those.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. But I just couldn't remember if the 4 years required any specific time in any specific district, and I don't think it does.
Well, because you're living.
I mean, the whole state is their district.
Right. Yep. So are there any questions about where we think we are right now? Committee? Vacation, Senator Rahm?
Senator Polina's hand was up first.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Anthony.
That's
Anthony,
okay.
raise your left hand when you raise your hand because your right hand is out of my picture. Thank
Okay.
you.
I just want to make sure you don't have to be of quiet and peaceable behavior to run for office.
You do.
Right.
You do. Well, you have to be of quiet and peaceable behavior to be able to vote.
Right.
So I
Not to
assume
run
you
for
have,
office.
yeah,
Oh, so you think it goes to running for office as well?
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
So-
so something to consider.
Senator Rahm?
So it looks like we don't have someone from the Attorney General's office.
Yes, the Attorney General's office is not going to weigh in because this is not an issue for them. They will not tell us whether it would be constitutional or unconstitutional to require voting.
Mhm.
It wouldn't, and they are reluctant to advise us on how a court would deal with it
Mhm.
because if we passed something, they would be put in the position of defending what we passed.
Okay, got it.
And if we don't pass anything, they're not in a position because they are defending nothing. A court case would be between the person who was being challenged and the person who was challenging.
Okay, so I was curious when they were going to come in because I was wondering if it's up to the individual parties to be privately represented in this kind of court case.
Yes.
Okay. And I was going to ask whichever lawyer, was sort of present with us, what the pros and cons are of having that determined by a private court case. I would just name the ones that I see, which are, someone may not have the means to be well represented in that kind of case. They may not be as popular of a candidate. I saw it. I've been thinking a lot about what it means for it to go to court. Has it gone to court before? Can anyone remember a time that it has gone to court?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Well, Chris, I don't think so. If they had gone to court, there probably would have been a resolution by the court, and there would have been. There's no court cases.
Okay. Okay.
So I have to say I don't really want to prolong this conversation very much because we've had it before for such a long time, and the decision at that time. So unless anybody has any other suggestions, the decision at that time was that short of defining what it meant, you had to live here, you had to be physically present for 183 days. You had to have, you don't even have to be on the checklist to run for, you don't have to be a voter, I don't think, to run for office. You do for local office, but you have to own property. You have to have paid Vermont taxes. You have to have children in school. Whatever we put in there was problematic.
Mhm.
So I at this point, I can't think of anything we could put in there that would not be problematic. So if anybody has any good suggestions, just throw them out. I mean, throw them out at us.
Share, in other words, share them.
Yes, share them.
Well, so, as I scan and I don't see anybody sort of wanting to throw another idea out, I'll just say as someone who I have learned today has been accused of causing World War III here with my suggestion, it was an attempt to not require someone to be property owning or, have other things that are kind of a class marker that would demonstrate that they are a resident here. I've just dealt with a young person, at UVM who came back from military service and had to fight with UVM about, in-state tuition, et cetera. So I was trying to find an alternative to kind of a property ownership model. I see some issues with waiting for the courts to be the ones to hash this out. And whether or not it came up after the last time the committee took extensive testimony on this, I know we're not taking up constitutional changes this year, but I would actually say if we don't further see an ability to define it, I would actually be more in favor of taking it out. I even said to Dave Graham, I was the one who said maybe it should just be naming the 10 of the Vermont towns and getting it right, a la Fred Tuttle. But at this point, I just worry more about someone who's either an unpopular candidate or doesn't have the ability to well represent themselves being taken out of a race, or even a popular candidate being taken out of a race because this challenge goes to court rather than us having a clear definition. So at some point in the future, I would actually recommend we don't have a residency requirement rather than waiting for the courts to determine what it is.
Okay, well, that would be something for the next biennium, because that's when you can introduce constitutional amendments. So does anybody else, Senator Clarkson?
I'm trying to find where the land ownership thing is identified. I can't find that.
I didn't say there is land ownership.
Okay, so Keisha, there is, you don't have to own land.
Okay, Senator Clarkson, that was my fault. I said short of when we talked about it before, short of defining it in some way, how do you do it? And
Yes,
land ownership was one of the ways you could define being a resident.
But thank goodness we don't.
Yes, we don't.
So I'm happy to leave it as it is. And I think it is an ongoing issue. We dealt with it, 2 years ago pretty fully. And if nobody has a better idea, I would keep it as it is.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to the suggestion to limit the number of JPs that a party can nominate. And I suspect that came from probably a town where, in Putney, for example, I will say that we have 12 JPs, and the parties the Democrats would nominate 6 and the Republicans would nominate 6. And that just kind of was an understanding. We can't get any Republicans to be nominated now. I don't know that we have a Republican caucus in town. So the 12 candidates tend to be either Democrats or progressives or combination. And so I suspect that this suggestion came from a similar town where it's hard to get people nominated from the minority party or non-party. So Will, do you want to comment on this at all? And I'm not sure if this would even be constitutional.
Sure. I have a few comments, Senator White, that I hope will help. I think you've probably identified one potential reason that this issue would be raised. It also, I think, may have come from the fact that, so everything you said is correct. Each town has a set number of justices of the peace that they can elect. It's based on their population, I believe. For a long time, there has been gentlemen's agreements, traditions in a lot of towns where each individual party committee in that town only nominates one half of that number. The numbers are odd. So every 2-year cycle, it will flip back and forth between the two parties where, say, you have 5 justices of the peace, the Democrats do 3 one year, the Republicans do 2. Then the next cycle, the Republicans do 3 and the Democrats do 2. Those, like I said, are gentlemen agreements that I'm aware of just anecdotally in my position and hearing from people with questions about these that have, I don't want to say broken down, but gone away in a number of places. And so now I think there are some instances where there are people of one party or the other who were used to that gentleman's agreement, and it is now not being followed, and the other party is, say, nominating enough people for the whole slate. And so then the reaction is, can we limit the number of candidates that party would nominate? Maybe you would say proactively every other year you nominate 1/2 minus 1. I don't think that's a good idea, and not sure whether that's constitutional either. And I wanted to point out that it's interesting, and we give this advice, of course, when asked, but I don't think we're always asked. There's a provision in the statute already, Title 17, Section 2143, political representation on the Board of Civil Authority. I won't read the whole thing because of time, but essentially it says if one or another party is underrepresented, if the Board of Civil Authority of any public political subdivision does not contain at least 3 of each major party, the legislative body can appoint additional justices of the peace from that underrepresented party at the request of either the party, town party committee, or even 3 voters in the town. And then it's interesting, it's a good provision. It says that those justices of the peace can only serve elections functions where that balance is needed. They can't then hear property tax appeals, for instance. So there is already a provision in there that would let the underrepresented party correct that balance for purposes of representation on elections business on the BCA. And otherwise, I think it's a matter of kind of people sorting out the fact that those were gentlemen's agreements that didn't have a basis in the law, and nominate an equal slate to run against each other, and may the best man win, or woman,
Or woman.
Or person.
So I don't know that I've ever had opportunity to disagree with you before, but I am going to correct you on something.
Okay.
The towns can elect up to, and it's 5, 7, 10, and 12.
Thank you.
So it's not all odd numbers.
5, 7, 10. You're right. Good call. You've disagreed with me many times before, though, and been right.
But I've never corrected you. Does anybody else have anything that would like to weigh in on this? And I do think that provision was put in there. I think there is that provision for having non-elected JPs to balance it out. And also, if you don't have them even serving as BCA members, I think that when there's election issues, you have to try and make sure that you have a balance between the parties. And that's in Title 17. So anybody else care to weigh in on that one? Senator Clarkson?
How big is this issue? How big is this problem?
My guess is that there are people in a lot of towns where there isn't a balance that probably feel left out of the process. I have no idea how big it is.
Maybe Gwen or somebody could weigh in. I mean, who brought it? Was this brought by a large crowd? I mean, was this brought to us by VLCT or?
No, it was not. But regardless of how many towns are in that situation, I don't know that there's much we can do about it. I mean,
that's what.
So Gwen, did you want to weigh in on it at all?
This is the first I hear of this being an issue. This is not, and it's a statewide, this is not a municipal office.
Yes,
either,
this is the
so-
JP.
Yes, this is
I mean,
JP's.
Oh,
You,
but it's not a municipal office.
exactly, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
But, okay, it's not, you're right. But it is by town.
It's not serving municipal functions is what I'm
Right.
getting at. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay, anybody else have anything that they'd like to weigh in on this one?
No.
Okay. Let's move to the primary then. So here's the issue that John has brought up, Carol has brought up, and Will has brought up. The issue of the timing of local ballots with the primary, local. And so who wants to weigh in on that to set the stage for us? Is that a Will issue?
It may be, although I think from our perspective, the more important thing was the general election, not the primary.
Oh, okay. Is that the case, Carol and John? It's the general rather than the primary,
Or
Carol?
am I forgetting?
It's actually both, mainly because of the difference between local election timelines for warnings, for having ballots available, and trying to have an opportunity to perhaps print local questions on the general ballot, in that case, the general election ballot, but more importantly, being able to have the timelines change so that you can mail all your ballots at one time. So that you're not, because for the primary and the general election, they go out 47 days before. For local elections, it's 20, and you're doing 2 mailings. And so if there's a way to adjust those dates for local elections, it would also be beneficial to have that expanded window for all local elections, not just for the ones that are held in conjunction with the primary and the general.
John?
Absolutely. My concern is, because I'm in the middle of it, is the town meeting deadlines for town meeting day. So not simply to sync them with the primary and the general, but we have no margin for error under such a short turnaround. Folks do expect their ballots earlier than we can actually provide them. But I've had some difficulties, and I've already used up the few days of margin for error I have. So it would be a good thing to. Eventually, that's going to cause problems. I think it has, in terms of misprinted ballots in a couple other towns in recent years. And if there were a little more breathing space there to get those filing deadlines and to deal with that, I think you'd see those problems largely fade away. And I'm knocking on wood when I say that.
I think there might be two separate coordinations here. One is this coordination of the local timing with the state elections, and the other is the coordination between town and school. And I think that the coordination between town and school might be a larger conversation because it has to involve clearly the agency of education. But are they two separate issues here, Will, or can they be dealt with in separately or together?
Those are definitely two separate issues, and I think you are right that the coordination between school and town votes will take longer than a small issue would. But I think I heard 3 issues there if you're bringing in coordination with school districts, because what I heard from John and Carol is, one, the issue of coordinating with statewide elections. If you want to hold an election on that same date, get those voters and send your local election ballots out with your statewide election ballots, how we can facilitate that better. And then what I heard from John was a very general statement about simply moving the deadlines back related to local elections and creation of ballots and candidate filings. Am I right, John? I mean,
yes, and I think it would be something that would need to be held in mind anyway, because you'd want consistency between, special, essentially special town or city meetings, which would be not on town meeting day, and then the town meeting day ones. Having two separate, sets of filing deadlines on a different type of or length of calendar, I think could create issues. I think it would need to be uniform. So whatever you all decide for, I would say for August and November, you should think in terms of consistency to applying it, at least to an extent, as much as possible to town meeting day.
Carol?
Just wanted to give an example. A couple of years ago, Berry City wanted to add a question to the November general ballot in 2018. The deadline for getting the language to the Secretary of State's office is about 55 days or so before the election, because the ballots have to be available 47 days before. Well, for a local election, you can't approve your warning more than 40 days in advance. And so we were outside of that 30 to 40 day window to approve the warning for the special election. I managed to talk my city council into approving the language early enough that we could put it on the ballot, but then said to them, you can't change it when we go to approve the warning because we've already printed the ballots. So it's, you're running into those really gray areas if you do that kind of stuff.
Got it. So is this something that these timing issues? It would be really nice to get them, at least some of them, in place for the next election. Is that something that can happen between the Secretary of State's office and the clerks within a short period of time? Senator Rahm, did you have a question? Oh, okay. Carol?
I can see the clerks and Secretary of State's office coming up with some language. I can also see some potential pushback from select boards who want to have that extra time to develop the budgets they want to vote on, develop the questions they want to vote on. And so I can see there being pushback in that direction. For widening the window. Just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to my select board days, and it's hard enough to get things done in the timeline that, to lengthen it would be problematic for a lot of towns, I would think. Gwen, do you have an opinion on that?
Finding the mute button. I think that's probably why a lot of this hasn't changed, is because of finding the right numbers that work for everybody. So yeah, I would definitely agree.
Well, committee, what do you think? Oh, Will, I'm sorry.
Just one final thought. I think I appreciate Carol bringing that up because that is a consideration. But that to me speaks more to, and I understand John Odom's desire to have some consistency across the local elections, but that really would become more of an issue if you were trying to do that, if you were trying to do it as a general matter for all local elections, including annual meeting. And I feel like it may have the biggest pushback around annual meeting. I'm speaking a little bit off the top of my head, but where you have a lot to develop in January in a short time frame when you're back from holidays and are thinking about the new year. But I think that you could potentially not invoke that entire discussion with some more specific language toward the primary and the general about special elections, where I would imagine that section starting something to the effect of, if a town or city desires to hold a special election as the November general or August primary, yada, yada, here are your deadlines to get an article sent out for in that specific circumstance, but not for the rest of your local elections throughout the year.
Oh.
And I'd be willing to work on that kind of more targeted language with Carol if she agrees that that might be possible.
Oh, okay. Anthony, Senator
Well,
Polina?
just to be clear, you're saying it would be an option essentially.
Yes. I mean, it's
Yeah.
always an option whether they want to hold a special election in
Sure.
with our statewide elections.
Because I could envision a lot of pushback on that other question, otherwise, without having a whole lot of hearings and hearing from a lot of town clerks and select board members and whatnot. But I think making it an option might actually get people used to the idea, and they might end up, maybe a couple of years down the road, it may end up making it more formal.
But this is, you're talking about just if they wanted to have a question on the November or August ballot. They wanted to hold a special election that day so they could mail it out together, but there is no state election in March anyway, so that's less of an issue, isn't it? Because they don't have to coordinate with the state on March elections.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So committee, does anybody else have any questions or comments about that? And should we just let them go and see if they can come up with something?
Well, can I just ask again? I know
Yep.
you're using the word election, special election, but I presume it would relate to anything, meaning a ballot question. We don't mean an election of a person to an office. We mean any question that they might bring forward.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought.
No, sorry, I didn't mean that. Yeah. Yeah. John?
You know, I realized I was tilting at windmills a bit there, but maybe if Will and Carol, with the blessing of the council, might look at least moving back the candidate filing deadline a bit. That shouldn't interfere with the select boards and city councils and their budget creation process, but it would potentially allow us another week or so to deal with the ballots. I mean, 1 week would make a huge difference on those March elections.
John, do you know that I assume when you said with the approval of, you were talking about us and you said the council?
Oh, sorry, I'm used to that.
I figured you
council
were.
And I've got a council meeting tonight. It's just all the committee. Yes.
I know it's just fine. It's just fine. I knew what you meant, and I'm sure everybody else did too.
I should have said all y'all.
All y'all.
I'm from Kentucky, so there you go.
Anybody have any concerns about seeing if we can come up with something that would allow towns to do that and the state to combine on those two elections?
No.
Okay, good. So let's see if we can come up with something. Okay, so the next question on the list was alternatives to sending out 3 ballots in the primary. And one of the suggestions was letting people request a ballot. I'm not sure if that would save on postage. It wouldn't probably save on printing, but any committee members have anything they'd like to throw into this conversation? And then we'll ask Will if he has some suggestions, and the town clerks and VLCT and anybody else. I don't see any hands. All right, Will, do you want to talk a little bit about that issue?
Sure. This is I think it's a large issue with a lot of implications. The suggestion would be, I guess one potential suggestion would be requiring voters to request, when they request their absentee ballot for the primary, to indicate which party's ballot they want. Seems reasonable and like it would make total sense, and it would be easy to implement and would save on postage. My knowledge of the history of that is that people do not want that choice recorded and available for people to request public records on and have more information about what your party affiliation is. Further steps down that road would be actually registering by party in Vermont. That would be a fundamental change, and I see Madam Chair's immediate reaction to that is like most Vermonters that I speak with. So short of that, in order to avoid sending all 3 primary ballots out to every voter, you would need to have them request which one they want, election by election.
Mhm.
And that choice is going to be a public record unless you all somehow exempt it from being.
That's what I was going to ask. Would it have to be a public record?
And that's a good question for somebody other than me.
Senator Clarkson?
Nothing else about our ballots is, well,
Yes, it is.
there is, yes, I was going to say it. Right.
I think I've told
There's
you.
one time when it's marked, which you request, they used to mark on the checklist which ballot you take when you're in person voting. They would mark which one you took.
I think that was probably illegal for them to do because they are supposed to hand you all 3 ballots.
I
They
know,
are
but
not in person.
that's relatively new, I feel like, because we used to be able to have the checklist copied in those days, and you would see who requested what.
In the presidential.
Am I
in the
crazy in
president-
thinking that?
In the
No,
presidential.
presidential.
Primary. Presidential
in the
only.
presidential, right.
Yes, only.
So that is the only time your ballot choice is made public.
Yes.
And any indication of your party preference is made public whatsoever.
Yeah. So,
And that, Senator White, I've given you guys the brief history on that before, that was a push and pull where
right.
my understanding is the national parties were trying to strip Vermont of its primary
Mhm.
Right.
so that we wouldn't have a part in the primary process. The pushback for what they wanted is they said, do party registration or we're stripping your primary because they
Yep.
want that information on people's party preferences. The pushback was, no, we're not going to do party registration. And the compromise was that every 4 years at the presidential primary, they would record your choice and that choice would be public. And so that's, after every presidential primary, we get umpteen requests for the participation report from that primary because it's where they get a sense of party affiliation. And so you'd be creating a second opportunity at that if you went this direction.
Yeah.
It would be available every 2 years in August.
And I will say, I probably people know that I'm a Democrat, but I believe it was the National Democratic Party that was responsible for that. Senator Rahm?
So I would say there's probably a lot of people who agree we're just extremely proud of our system and don't want to require party registration. I will speak for myself. I wonder if there's been thought given to kind of behavioral nudges, like a user experience design of this and picking a color for each one and making it really clear somehow. I mean, I think if we wanted to limit confusion, we might have kind of a behavioral psychologist or user experience designer look at this and say, here are some options just to make sure that confusion is not as prominent for people. That's the only thing I can think of that would get at this issue without making a major change to how we run our, how we do not require people to register by party.
I have to admit, I did not understand a word you said.
Right.
I have no idea how having red and blue and green, and you request a red ballot if that's still public knowledge. Everybody knows what a red ballot is.
Audrey wants to say something. Maybe there's something others.
Okay. Okay, Audrey.
I am certainly not a legal expert on anything that has to do with what you have to notify in Vermont, but I think Senator Rahm brought up an interesting piece that there are some behavioral pieces that I know my organization, the Vote at Home Institute, has worked with groups like Ideas 42 and the Center for Civic Design as to how are you communicating with voters to encourage them to sort of complete a ballot correctly. And I keep an example here on my desk. This is what my wife's ballot looks like here in Colorado. This is the one she didn't use in the primary. And you can usually design aspects to these sorts of things can really be useful. And I know Chris and Will I think they've mentioned to me before that they've talked with the Center for Civic Design, but we would be so pleased to work with them, but also some of the other behavioral, like social science work that is behind all of this. So there are ways to do it. that don't actually require law to.
Oh, I think that I completely misunderstood that because we're not talking about the ballot, getting people to do the right ballot and send in the right ballot and return the other ballots. That's a different issue. This is, are there alternatives to mailing out 3 ballots to begin with?
Right.
That's
the question I think Will is asking us at this very moment.
Okay,
Right.
sorry, I saw them as related because they all look exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem. That's basically what I'm trying to bring up. They look exactly the same. You have to just look really closely at the party, and so that might confuse people.
Yeah, no, I think that Will has already told us that he's working with some people on the design of the envelope and the design of the ballot and stuff. So that was what I wanted to get at here was, are there alternatives to sending them all out? Senator Clarkson?
So, Will, how often is the primary ballot for any one of the parties longer than 1 page?
Very rarely.
So would it not be possible to print both sides of one so that you only have 2 pieces of paper rather than 3? Wouldn't that cut down costs?
Whose ballots are you going to print back to back?
So they could alternate year to year, like we alternate chairs for our joint committees. It could be very, very democratic. It could be, just rotated. It just does not need to be a big deal. It strikes me that, we have a front and a back that we are not using efficiently. And anyway, that strikes me as one way to get rid of at least one ballot. Piece of paper.
Will? Carol?
That's the first time I've heard
Oh
that.
my God.
The first time I've heard that suggestion. So
how would you keep a voter from voting both sides of the ballot?
Just the same way we keep them from doing other things like signing their names on it. You might ask them to you could mark it in a different color on the top. It isn't difficult to be pretty clear. And again, your instructions could be clear.
And then it would be a spoiled ballot if they did.
But then we're going to give them a chance to cure.
No, that isn't a curable, that's a spoiled ballot.
Right. But I think,
John?
Just that I feel that would be far more confusing for people and would very much possibly dramatically increase the number of spoiled ballots. People are going to get a ballot, they're going to vote all over it. 3 distinct ones at least makes them stop and think for a minute.
What makes them distinct if they're not color differentiated?
They're 3 different pieces of paper.
I realize that, but to go to Keisha's point,
So I don't want us to talk about whether they look alike or how you distinguish. Right now, you get 3 pieces of paper, 3 ballots. You can vote on one and return 2 in a different way.
Well,
but you only can vote on one. If you had them back to back, in many town elections or elections, you turn it over and then you keep voting.
That's why I prefaced it by asking Will how long the primary ballots usually are.
I know. Okay. But I would just turn it over and keep voting.
Maybe not if it said something else on the top.
Okay, does anybody else have an opinion about this? Senator Collmore?
Just leave it the way it is, period.
Thank you. Senator Polina?
I agree with Senator Collmore. I understand it's an expense issue and I'm sympathetic to that. I really am. But I don't think we're going to come up with a solution anytime soon. I think it's something to think about down the road because I think it is an expense that a lot of people feel is not quite worth it. But I think it's part of the process and I don't think we're going to be able to fix it right now.
Yes, I think you're right. And actually, I think that a way of fixing it would be to have the parties run their own primaries because it is a party issue. The primary is not a state election issue. It's a party issue. And if each party ran their own elections, that would take care of it. So We
That's what
used
the
to do it
discussion
that
we're
way.
having.
Lila,
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
We used to do it that way
Okay.
in Vermont. We had caucuses.
Lila had a question, Jeanette.
Lila?
Yes, Lila Richardson with the League of Women Voters. I think, Madam Chair, you said that you were going to address the issue of having to return all 3 ballots separately, but I just wanted to make sure it's true because I wasn't sure where it would fit on the agenda. It's one of the things that causes defective ballots, and why my understanding is the primary rate of defective ballots was much higher because you have to return the 2 unvoted ballots, and people were confused by that. So this would be related to that in my mind, that if you could request just 1 ballot, it would simplify that process.
Yeah.
Well, but I think that it would simplify the process, but I think that we had that conversation that people do not want to be identified as requesting a ballot, a party ballot.
No, I think that's part of the same issue.
But
Yes.
we-
It would be
we could exempt them.
one other piece of the 3 ballot process is whether all 3 have to be returned, even if
Yes.
they're sent out.
That is a different question. Yes. And John, I saw your hand up, and then Will.
Yeah, I was just going the same place. There's no reason, we get a ballot, one envelope, 1 ballot for the other elections, and anonymity is held.
Mhm.
So no reason why they would have to send back all 3. If they just sent back the one they voted on envelope, you have the same guarantee of anonymity, and we don't know which one they voted on.
Mhm. And I saw that, Will, I'll call on you, but I saw that Audrey just held up her spouse's unused ballot. So clearly in Colorado, they don't mail back the unused ones. Will?
Exactly. We noted the same thing.
I was going there too. And I appreciate it from Lila, though. She's correct, because the point I wanted to make was the discussion about whether you could request just 1 ballot. Yes, it's related to printing and giving us the ability to print fewer of the ones we know are requested less. But it's also related to the issue of defective rates in the primary and just trying to make that less difficult, returning the unvoted ballots. And so another way you could address that is what Lila was suggesting, which is that the unvoteds don't come back. I'll just put it out there. I mean, the concern with that I know will be raised is the existence of those live ballots, as we heard a lot talked about in November, which are, unvoted official ballots being out there. But our standard refrain, and I think it's what John was getting at, is 1 voter, 1 ballot comes back. And it doesn't matter how many other blank ballots there are out in people's houses and on their kitchen tables. You only get to return 1.
And if you try and vote, let's say you return it and then tried to vote in person with the other one, you would have already been checked off the checklist.
Yeah.
So you couldn't use that, so that there isn't much power in an unvoted ballot if you used 1 already.
Correct.
So it strikes me they could recycle them, and we'd be done with it.
So does Senator Collimore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just trying to walk this through in my mind. So you mail out 3, the voter fills 1 out and mails it back, keeps the other 2. How are you saving any money?
You aren't.
You're not.
Okay. Then I don't know what the advantage of that is.
That was for the reducing the fact that a lot of the reason it's defective in the primary is they haven't returned those, or they've returned them outside of the unvoted ballot envelope.
And the return envelope is cheaper
Why?
because it weighs less.
I think that when you get into that size envelope,
You're
that's
still paying for it.
that's not a huge issue. But I think that I would almost, because I think that there's going to be a lot of questions about those ballots hanging around out there. I would almost say, let's see what happens with a redesign of the ballots and the envelopes themselves, and see in the next primary if we have the same defective rate, or if that goes down because we have a new design. And if it doesn't go down, then let's address it again. But if it goes down considerably because we've approached it in a better way, then there's no need to, because I do think you're right, Will, that is going to cause a lot of concern by people who are concerned about election fraud.
Yep.
Anybody else? I thought I saw Carol's hand, but I'm not sure. All right, so we'll leave it the way it is for now. All right, I think that we'll take just a couple minutes of to look at this issue, but I think that we just simply do not have the time to be able to do this, and I think there's would cause more confusion. Was the two suggestions around ranked choice voting. One was to let the parties, each party decide if they wanted to use ranked choice voting in their primary. And if people want to weigh in, I think it would be a little confusing if some parties did and some parties didn't. But anybody want to weigh in on that suggestion? Paul?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Paul Burns, Executive Director of the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. We did not suggest this as a standalone question, the ranked choice voting in primaries, though it kind of goes to the broader question of ranked choice voting, which my organization and many others are supportive of. I recognize that and believe that this is not the time to shoehorn this into another bill, or that you don't have the time probably right now to take this up. So while I want to say I think that this has merit as an idea and is worthy of consideration by the committee at some point, I recognize that this may not be the time. In broad strokes, though, we have supported and continue to support the idea that this could be useful in state elections, particularly in federal elections. And when you use it there, you could look at the presidential primary or other primaries as well as the general election. I know at least 5 states used ranked choice voting for their presidential primary elections in 2020. I'm sure Audrey knows more about that, but there's a Burlington question on the ballot in town meeting day that will be instructive, and you may have a chance to consider this issue if that passes and you were to look at the request for a change to the charter there, for instance, and that might be the next reasonable opportunity to look at this issue from our perspective. So strongly supportive of the idea, but if this isn't the time, I don't feel the need to press it further now.
So, Anthony, Senator Polina?
I was just going to somewhat say similar to what Paul said. I believe ranked choice voting is an important issue. It's an important one that we take up. But I honestly think it'd be hard to take it up in the context of the way we're going through these ideas right now. I think it's deserving of its own hearing and a lot of input from the parties and whatnot. I think it's something that I'm supportive of in general, but I don't think we can give it the time and the attention that it really would take to do it now. Maybe we could do it later on in this. I'm not saying we should put it off for years, but I think we should put it off for this discussion.
Thank you. So unless anybody has any different thoughts on that, I'm going to just cross off that one and the first question under the general elections, which is to use ranked choice voting in the federal elections, and just leave that whole discussion for later. Is that okay? And unless anybody, okay, thank you. Thank you.
Because I think the committee has gotten bills on that anyway in our committee.
Correct.
We may have one, yeah. And
we do.
Okay, so we can look at that later. All right, so this, I know that the Secretary of State's office said they didn't know what the issue was here, but you were the ones that brought it to us, the issue of the presidential nominating process. It was on your list. So unless if you don't want to pursue it, I'm happy to drop it.
I don't think we need to pursue it at this time, given what we're trying to do with everything else going on.
Okay. Anybody really want to talk about that?
Of anything, Senator White, just to drop the idea in your heads, was thinking one element of it was whether we may want to raise the filing fee for independent candidates.
Oh, thank you, sweet. What is it? Hey,
But honestly, we can move on.
Okay, great. She just got hot tea.
I did. I had my tea angel delivered. Isn't that the best?
Okay, so I'm going to skip over one here and go to the coordination of school and municipal and general elections, and say that is probably a conversation that needs to be held, but it is not going to be resolved in this bill. And it's more, I think we already talked about that. So can we cross it off unless anybody really wants to talk about this? Senator Clarkson?
I would just like to clarify what the problem is, because I know it's a problem, but I haven't experienced it so much. So I'd appreciate at least an articulation of, and I know we're facing it now as we look at the Australian ballots in this COVID year. I know COVID has kind of exacerbated this problem. Could someone summarize the problem so that we know what we're putting off?
Will, do you want to?
Sure, really quickly. That's well put, Senator Clarkson, in that COVID certainly did elevate this issue. And what the reason that it did is because of the authority that the legislature rightfully granted school boards to say they wanted to mail a ballot to all the voters in the school district. I think the best way for me to describe the fundamental issue here, it's a little bit less about coordination between schools and towns than it is just defining the administration of elections in union school districts.
Yeah.
I think I've said to you guys before, there's no equivalent entity in those districts, for example, to a board of civil authority. They don't have election officials, so they rely traditionally on the town clerks. And under normal circumstances, they've been conducting their meetings in a certain way over time for a long time. For instance, they're using Australian ballot, but they do it by request. So when the town clerks get a request for their town ballot, they ask if the person also wants a school ballot, put them in the same envelope and send them out, and it's not a big deal. It's a much bigger deal when you have, as is this year, school districts that have typically done their business from the floor or just on a request-based Australian ballot system, now saying, I would want to mail ballots to every voter in my district, and us saying, who are you asking to do that? Not my office, but just the ether, because there's no direction in the law who actually performs those duties. I mean, there's references to Australian ballot elections throughout the union school district statutes without any language about how absentee ballots are administered. That's crazy. And so it leaves you at a point saying who's responsible for these duties, whether they're lined up with the town elections or not.
And that's why
that is a bigger project for me and the Agency of Education to work on and bring proposals to you guys about.
Yes, and just a minute, Carol, and that's why we put the thing in the ability for the municipalities to mail out their ballots this year. We put language in there encouraging cooperation between the towns and the schools. Carol?
It would be a big enough problem if it was a one-on-one issue, one school district, one municipality, but it's exacerbated by the fact that we now have so many merged school districts. And so, 5, 6, 7 different school districts our towns are part of one school district and trying to coordinate all those different ballots. So.
John?
And some that have multiple school districts, their elementary, their high school, all overlapping. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, John?
I would just say, you've got cases now where it's not working. You've got cases now where it is working. And the cases where it is working is when there's unanimity, there's agreement between all the towns in the school district and then the individual towns, the municipalities within it. So they're allowed to coordinate it. I don't see why you couldn't just put in even just a line into the bills authorizing school districts to do this too, if member towns also choose to mail out their own municipal ballots as well. I mean, just toss a line like that in there, and then you would allow a town like Montpelier to keep doing what we're doing. That's going to work fine now, as long as Roxbury, the other town in our school district, went along with it too. It would give Roxbury veto power over the whole process, but then it would also allow us all to have a consensus if we wanted to do it, if you just linked those two things together. And I think you could do that in a sentence.
Will?
To clarify, and that John and I spoke about this a little bit. John's referring back to the provision that we already talked about allowing municipalities to mail out ballots. And over the course of that discussion, I pointed out that I thought it would make more sense to only allow that for towns and cities and not school districts, because of this gaping hole in the administration of school district elections. And what John's saying, which I think we could at least consider, and I could try working on with him, I don't know if it's as simple as he thinks it is, but it may be, to say that a school district could also vote to mail out all of their ballots. It should be their decision. You shouldn't be having towns on an individual basis making decisions about what they do with the school district ballots. If the school district were to decide to do that, they could, and they could only do so if they had the agreement of the towns within their district, is I believe what John's suggesting. So it'd be school board checks in with 2 select boards. Those select boards say, yes, we want to send out the school ballot with our town ballots. We're doing that with our town ballots this year. So yeah, we're going to move forward.
I jumped a little on that. I apologize. I just don't, the idea of putting all those eggs into that basket unnecessarily, that, the concerns, the structural concerns that Will is talking about, I think is not, is not necessary, and could even step us back a little bit.
Well, if you can come up with some language, it certainly won't do anything for this year, because this isn't even going to be passed until well after that. And I think that there are so many other issues around. I mean, there's still the issue of who administers the school elections, and we now have, when we had BUHS district, I guess they did it. We now have a separate elementary school district that has 7 towns in it. And the town clerks, I think that has to be worked out. So if you can come up with some simple language here, that would be great. But I think that this is a larger question. So, okay.
Great.
So now the next one on our list is to declare Election Day a holiday. And does anybody want to weigh in on this? I'm going to start this. I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but so we've had this discussion a number of times. And first of all, I'm not sure if we're talking about general election day, primary election day, or town meeting election day. And when I was on the select board in Putney, we thought maybe if we had should it be a holiday? Well, if you have a holiday, only state employees get the day off anyway. Nobody else gets that holiday. Just because it's a holiday doesn't mean people get it off. So we had our town meeting on a Saturday because more people could come, right? They weren't working. And we had far fewer people there. And the response was, I'll give up a weekday, but I'm not going to give up a Saturday. And if you have a holiday, if it's a holiday, I'm going to go skiing. I'm not. So weigh in here what you think, committee members and others. Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with you. I don't think it would necessarily make it any more likely that a voter would turn out to vote than it does now. So I would oppose this.
And only state employee, if we declared it a state holiday, only state employees would get the day off if they bargained for it, and nobody else. The place that most places, private give between 5 and 7 or 8 maybe paid holidays a year, but I doubt that they'd give election day as one. So anybody else care to weigh in? Senator Polina?
I hate to come out against the holiday. It seems like so counterintuitive, but I think you're right in terms of, I don't think it would necessarily increase attendance or participation, but I think the idea of a holiday is always kind of nice, but I think, you make a good point that it's not going to make a difference. So I guess I'd say I'm leaning in your direction.
I would be glad to put a bill in to calling it Polina Day if you're just interested in having a holiday.
That's good.
And I'll
Thank
vote for it.
you. Senator Clarkson, you're muted. You're muted. Senator Clarkson.
We had that we had that holiday and we changed the name of it. Thank you for those of you. Yeah, thank you. I would agree. We have data because we had it both as a holiday and not as a holiday. Many of our towns changed it to Saturday to try and get more attendance. I think we have a lot of internal work in our towns to boost attendance. There are some, and I don't think it's related to whether or not it's a holiday. The pleasure of going to Heartland every year is that it's on a Tuesday and it is packed. It's packed. And then you go to the next town and there are, 100 people. It is, I think, an internal marketing challenge for each town. And I think that, sadly, I wish making it a holiday would affect attendance, but I don't think it would.
Senator Polina?
Also, if we're thinking about it for the general election, the statewide general elections, mail-in voting seems to have boosted participation quite a bit. So maybe we're making some progress there.
Right. That was a much more effective way of engaging voters and having them participate.
So Senator Rahm?
So as usual, this might be a slight tangent, but I think what has come up, and especially this year, is we have only people who are generally retired who can participate in the administration of our elections. And I know there's a lot of people who want to be able to volunteer, whether it's for part of the day, for a candidate, for some part of Tuesday, they want to participate and they feel penalized by their workplace. And I don't know that there's a law that we can pass, but maybe there's something in the Secretary of State's office where they give like a gold star to businesses that let their employees go volunteer on election day, some kind of compact to create more civic participation. That's my thought for the day on this.
Yeah, something like that is a good idea. But if it was a holiday, they wouldn't necessarily get it off, especially if they worked in private business.
Sorry, I would just completely agree that holidays don't usually help working people.
Yeah.
That's where I am with that. But, maybe we can increase civic participation for those who really want to participate in Tuesday as an important day in the country.
And
that's a great idea.
There are companies that give like Brattleboro Savings and Loan Bank down here gives all their employees a certain number of hours per month to participate in community activities. So something like that. So I will say, Allison, Senator Clarkson, to your point about internal marketing to get people at town meeting. According to Frank Bryan, to have real participation, you have to have a real issue, you have to have the discussion, and you have to have a vote. And the biggest problem that we have with town meeting is that we don't allow them to have real issues. We tell them what they can do and what they can't do. There's my little speech for the day.
And Senator White, I respectfully disagree. I think that the pleasure of a community gathering in the towns that have robust attendance, it doesn't matter. The discussion is always rich, and yes, I think it often helps having a big issue, but that also skews it sometimes and has people just coming for one thing and then leaving. I think that building community around town meeting is a challenge for every town, and I wish more towns would take it on as an opportunity.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say they should have one big issue. Every issue, we should give them the ability to make decisions on their own, which we don't do at the state level. We dictate everything that they can do almost. And so if town meeting, in fact, is reduced to a cute article in the Boston Globe about people having bean suppers together and sitting at town meeting knitting, then we've lost town meeting. So that's my speech.
And I've been at town meetings where they have defunded the sheriff's office, where they have voted to reverse financing for sidewalks, where they have stripped the police department of tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, I think there are some decisions that are actually made at town meetings still.
There are. I'm sorry I brought it up. It's just I have to take every opportunity to say that we need to give our towns more ability for self-governance. That's all I'm saying.
And I'm happy to pass our bill again.
We will take it up next week.
Bill.
So the next one on our list is review the major party requirements. Do we want to take that on? I don't know. Right now it's that they have to be organized in 30 towns in at least 7 counties and get at least 5% of in a statewide office, 5% of the vote. Are there problems with that? I don't remember where this came from. Anybody?
Maybe the party people here could actually speak to it.
Well, we only have major party people here. So is it a problem for the major parties?
Bruce, you're not nodding your head or disagree.
Well, Bruce Olson, Vermont Democratic Party. I would say this is not a priority for our party.
Okay. Martha?
Thank you. Martha Abbott, Assistant Treasurer of the Vermont Progressive Party. I think this discussion usually takes place in the context of other possible changes to the primary election process. It's been the requirement for a while, and then that's fine. You know, I don't think we have a problem with it. It becomes a problem sometimes when we try to interact it with other possible changes to the election law. Such as there was a recent discussion about if you're enter one primary as opposed to another primary, and then you get a write-in, and so you're the nominee of 2 parties. How does that work? And there's some interaction in those issues, but by itself, I don't think we have a problem with it.
Okay, so unless anybody else has something they'd like to throw in on this or concerns about it, I think we'll cross this one off the list. And then what I'm going to suggest is that we take a few minute break here. But before we go, just picking up on what Martha was talking about, that when we have Amarin, we had in our last meeting, we talked about 2 issues related to the parties. One was where the 5% gets assigned, which party it gets assigned to. And the other one was the positioning of your party's initials on the ballot. And I voted with 2 other people around the 3 other people around the 5%. I'm going to change that vote of mine because I think it doesn't matter. And I'm also going to change my vote on the placement of the RDP, LU, whatever party you want to put behind your name. Because I think that those are party questions and not necessarily general. I know that they're in the statutes, but I think they're more party issues. So we can have a little discussion on that, but I'm going to suggest that we not address those issues in this bill. Committee? Senator Collmore? Senator Polina?
Did Senator Collmore say anything?
He put his thumbs up.
Oh, okay. He's not on my screen. I couldn't tell. You're probably not surprised that I would tend to agree with you. So I would put a thumbs up as well.
Senator Clarkson?
But we were saving this for after our break when I'll be refreshed. No. But I'm disappointed. I think it's an issue we need to resolve. I wish you'd send us all to the cafeteria and work on resolving it, because I think there are issues that we should be resolving. I mean, so I understand where you're coming from. I appreciate that. I'm just disappointed that we are not going to have address this in this bill.
Senator Rahm?
So, I mean, being new, I'm just sort of thinking, okay, that, we were asking party folks to come share issues that they had about general election issues is what you would want to focus on. So we're still inviting party people to the table, but you want it all to be focused on general election. I mean, being new to the committee, I'm certainly not going to contradict that. I just think particularly the issue about major party status felt like an inter-party issue where one party in and of themselves can't really make any determinations for themselves.
I didn't understand that.
We had the two issues. I feel like, I guess what you're saying is, even though there was an issue that we were discussing that could be between two parties, like a minor party and a major party, or two major parties, you want them to work it out themselves, but the issue still lives with the Secretary of State's office. They're still the one that says right now, oh, you can just pick whichever party you want to give your percentage to, et cetera. That just feels hard for one party to be able to determine on their own.
Well, no, I'm not saying that it's in statute.
Right.
So I'm not saying that the Secretary of State would do it. I'm saying that I don't think that this is the appropriate bill to deal with this issue. And I think that it could end up being the poison pill.
Well, I think that's the issue. Is it the poison pill?
Oh.
I think it's an issue that I'd love to resolve. I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation about it between the parties, but it is an issue where the voters vote one way, thinking they're electing a candidate who represents X values, and then the candidate changes themselves and decides to run as a Y valued person. I think it's a misrepresentation of that candidate. And that is, I think, a core election issue. I understand that it's a poison pill because we disagree, and it would be, I understand that, but I also would hope we could be encouraged to have that conversation elsewhere. And I would love to know what that forum is, because I think that it needs to be resolved. I'm happy. I appreciate your not wanting to make this elections bill a poison pill, embedding something in it that is divisive. I get that. But it is an issue that somewhere in some forum we need to address.
And I think that it does need to be addressed, but I'm not sure that even statutorily is how it gets addressed. I think that, and the more I think about it, if I run in one party's primary as something, and then change my mind in the general election and take the party that wrote me in, then the voters are somewhat, they were hoodwinked. They feel like they were hoodwinked that time. So if the same person does the same thing the next time, then I say that if you fool me once, shame on you, but if you fool me twice, shame on me. So if that same thing happens in the next election with the same person and the voters still fall for it, then that's the voters' choice. So I think it is an issue, and it's an issue in some places as opposed to other places, and with some people as opposed to other people. But I think it is not a general enough issue that we should put it in this bill.
So I will just say, first of all, I really, usually I'm used to in the past sort of being taken aside by the chair and told that this isn't going to fly. So I appreciate your transparency. So I want to just honor that. I personally, I was the only one who had a different vote on major party status versus who gets to decide where to put their name of the party, what order, because I do feel like it has a really big outcome in our elections to be able to just decide where you put the percentage of your vote and determine major party status. That did feel like something that is, has material consequences that aren't remedied in a future election. So I can get over that, but I did feel like it was a general election issue. But I'm just saying I value your transparency. I'm just making that final point known. And I'm happy to go with the chairwoman.
Anybody else? All right. So Amarin, I just wanted to make sure that you were, and I also do believe in transparency. I think I was wrong, and I'm perfectly happy to admit that I think I made the wrong choice on those issues, given where we are with this bill and the importance of getting something major done. So anybody else have anything to say about Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to just not say anything more about it, but I think you bring up an interesting point. And I think it's up to the candidate in many ways. If the candidate is willing to risk political suicide, in essence, by doing exactly what you said, I don't think they would get elected the second time. I think people would say, we don't know who this person is because they flip-flop so often. I'm not voting for that person. So I think it is sort of a decision that the candidate could make and commit political suicide.
Senator Polina.
So just coming off of that, it's up to the voters to make those decisions. And I think that's what we're saying, is that the voters will decide ultimately.
Yeah.
I also do appreciate your honesty, Madam Chair. I really appreciate it.
We always appreciate it. It's one of the things we treasure about you.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest we take, I don't know what time it is.
It is 3 o'clock exactly.
How about if we take a 10-minute break, come back and get into the issue of mail-out ballots?
Sure.
And the other thing I'm going to suggest is that we not look at campaign finance and public financing of elections in this bill, that we do that in a separate bill.
Sure.
So I've just crossed those off the list. So we'll come back and talk about mail-out voting as opposed to mail-in voting. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Hopefully everybody had a good break and they feel refreshed, and Senator Clarkson got in her 24 jumping jacks. And
30.
Oh, 30. I do modified squats. So I think the best way to do this, and committee, correct me here if you think there might be a different way of doing this, is to first hear, so we're talking about kind of this huge issue of mail out ballots and how that worked, and should we continue to do it? So what I think makes sense is to hear first from what I call the good government groups, the VPIRG, the Campaign for Vermont, the League of Cities, League of Women Voters. They're kind of the good, what I consider good government groups. Then hear from the parties, that would be Bruce and Martha. Then from VLCT and the clerks, and then get into the kind of the details of what it would be. But here first, kind of the general feeling and the concept, and should we go forward with it? Shouldn't we go forward with it? That kind of thing and then get into more of the details, and Will can then start, Will and the clerks can start listing the details to us that we may need to pay attention to, and then people can comment on those. Does that make sense to anybody?
Sure.
Okay. Well, hearing no objections, then we'll start with Paul. So kind of general concepts, and we will get more into details and specific things that we have to pay attention to if we do this or don't do it. Okay, thanks. So Paul?
Yes, well, thanks so much, Madam Chair. Again, members of the committee, Paul Burns of VPIRG. And I should say that my organization joined with a number of others in submitting some testimony and comments specifically with respect to this question of universally mailed ballots and whether that should become a permanent feature of Vermont's general elections moving forward. These organizations were all strongly in favor of making that policy permanent. And what we're talking about in broad strokes is what was put together in rapid fashion, we must say, for the 2020 election. All credit to the parties who we've talked about before, but this committee being one of them, and then obviously those who implemented the policy at the local level and with the Secretary of State's office. These organizations, again, that joined together in offering the comments, in addition to VPIRG, was AARP Vermont, ACLU of Vermont, Conservation Law Foundation, Disability Rights Vermont, League of Women Voters Vermont, Rights and Democracy, Vermont Conservation Voters, Vermont NEA. And then there were two organizations that came on after we submitted, which is Justice for All and Main Street Alliance of Vermont. And over the course of the summer, too, we also had other organizations and businesses who were strongly in favor of implementing vote by mail, and that included Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, Ben & Jerry's, Burton, Seventh Generation, among others. So I just wanted to mention that there are many organizations and diverse organizations with an interest here. The idea, of course, for 2020 was that we wanted to have an election in the midst of a pandemic that was safe for voters and safe for poll workers and other local officials. And it made sense to implement this policy and approach that had already been used effectively in a handful of other states around the country. And it was important to us, I should say, that we preserved, even while implementing mailed out ballots to all active registered voters, that we preserve the opportunity and choice for people to be able to vote in person as well. And that is particularly important for some communities. Some folks with certain disabilities find it particularly important, for instance, for them to be able to vote independently, that they have this opportunity to vote in person at a polling place. New Americans expressed a strong interest in being able to preserve that, in part because of the translation services that are made available in person. And so even as we press to make permanent the idea that people should receive at their home these mailed ballots, having the opportunity to vote in person is, at least for the foreseeable future, an important element that we think should be preserved as well. But let's remember, and you've heard some of these numbers before, but Vermont broke all participation records in the midst of this pandemic. Some 45,000 more Vermonters voted in 2020 than had ever voted before. Nearly 73% of potential voters actually took advantage of their right to vote. 3/4 of them voted early. Most of them taking that ballot that they received at home and putting it in the mail, but a number of folks obviously taking advantage of the drop boxes that were available. We think that was important as well, and some bringing it to their clerks or voting in person, even a small number of them. And so this is a policy. I mean, if it can work, let me step back. Those states that had implemented prior to the pandemic this voting by mail policy, a lot of them took years to implement it. They maybe started with pilot projects and lots of public education over a long period of time. And while we didn't have that exactly, Vermont was building on an important history of many advantages that we had. Some 30% of Vermont voters had typically voted early in more normal times in past general elections. And so it wasn't a foreign concept, this ability. So we were kind of building on that. Plus the idea that we allowed people, we've always, or for some time now, allowed people to participate by voting early in the process. So that wasn't a new feature for folks. We've obviously had other advantages, automatic registration and election day or same day registration too. So these are all things that were in place that I think helped make it possible to implement a policy like this without that longer lead time. And I think the fact that we had relatively few, as a percentage of the overall voters, relatively few ballots that were defective is something to celebrate. I've said I think we can do more to try to address that through curing and other things, but I think it really was impressive that we had a relatively small percentage of defective ballots, lots of public education. And while we don't know exactly how many may have come in after the election, we know that, gosh, there was great work done by the Secretary of State's office, the local officials, and many organizations to encourage people to get those ballots sent in early. We just have to recognize that that was an important success as well. And so, and few, if any, we haven't seen evidence of fraud. We haven't seen evidence of many of the things that folks were concerned about, or some people at least were concerned about or raising objections about early on. And so I think almost an unmitigated success is what we see to move forward on a faster than normal timeline. Let's remember, 1 year ago, this was not being talked about in your committee. This idea that we were going to have vote by mail for 2020. What many people considered, the most important election of our lifetime. So to be able to adopt that as rapidly as the state did, great credit. And so now comes the question, should we keep that or not? And from our perspective, it would essentially represent a retreat from a policy that we know works well to engage more voters in the process. It would make it more difficult, in other words, for people to vote and participate as they choose by removing this approach to voting, by not sending every active registered voter a ballot to their home. And we see no reason to retreat from a policy like this that worked really well. And so, at a time when in some places, it is still challenging to get people to vote, we're always looking for ways to engage more people. Fundamentally, we believe that democracy works best when more people participate. This policy is one of those tools to help make it easier for people to participate, help to get more people involved in the process. There's always more education work that we can do. We're committed to continuing that effort. But I think as a fundamental policy, making sure that those ballots are automatically sent out to registered voters, making sure that there are multiple options for returning those ballots, including the drop boxes and the postage, prepaid postage on the envelopes, and making sure, again, that once they're received, there's pre-canvass and so forth. We've talked about that in other places. But I think those are the fundamental elements that we would like to see preserved and continue to move forward because they worked. And finally, Madam Chair, I would just say we've done, as I think I mentioned in earlier testimony, we reached out to some of our members. We received lots of good responses. Well over 100 people responded to say how much they appreciated having this opportunity to receive their ballots at home. And obviously, tens of thousands of Vermonters filled out their ballots at home and returned them that way when they had never done so before. And lots of folks felt that, in addition to being safer in a pandemic, that it gave them an opportunity to be thoughtful about their ballots as they're sitting at their kitchen table and really considering their choices, and they aren't rushed, and nobody's looking over their shoulder when they're voting, but it's a different process. You can really take the time, you can do the research that you want to, and I just think it's worth mentioning that many of our members raised that as a particular issue of interest for them, something that they felt more comfortable about and felt like a better informed voter, and they felt really good about that. So ease of voting, greater participation, and more thoughtful, informed voters seems like a winning policy to us, and one we would like to preserve.
Thank you. And I will before we move on to Pat, I will apologize because I left Audrey out when I talked about the good government groups. So I apologize for that. And just so that you know that we have, I've made sure that the administration is aware that these conversations are going on, and they have open invitation to join us and weigh in whenever they want. Mainly, I think probably just to listen to the conversations, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. So, Pat?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am president of the Campaign for Vermont Board of Directors. We did submit a letter supporting certainly the voter checklist and sending ballots to registered voters. We also talked about the importance of making sure that voter checklist is scrubbed and is accurate as far as who is registered to vote. But I think what Paul said was right on the money. I think the more people that want to get involved and vote and feel confident about voting, I think that's an important, I don't know what can be done about that, whether it's education or more transparency, whatever that means, but people need to feel confident that the vote is their vote and it's being received and recorded. And I think maybe if we can, the Secretary of State's office can talk about, I think it's called My Voter, maybe Chris Winters can have My Voter, where it shows that your ballot's been received and it's not, it's been accepted. And I think that's important for people to know that exists and to check how their vote is being received and counted. So we are very supportive of mailing ballots to Vermonters. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I thought we had lost you there for a little while because I saw that your symbol came up and it said Ben Kingsley.
Oh, he's on, he maybe want to speak as well. He's on the.
Is he here too?
There he is.
Okay, Ben. Oh, there you are. Okay. Thank you.
I would just echo exactly what Pat said. This is everything Paul said is right on the money. This is a clearly successful policy in terms of getting folks engaged. There's obviously things that we need to take into consideration, for doing this again, things like how to help town clerks process these ballots when they come in, better voter education around what the expectation is, like what ballot am I sending back, particularly in the primaries, and things like that. So things we can do to change the design of the ballot to make it more clear, what I'm supposed to be doing. All of those are positive things and can help on the fringes of this problem. But I think this is a clearly, successful program that, we should support.
Thank you, Ben. Pat, did you?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. You can't tell us apart. We work too closely together, me and Ben. One thing we had on our letter, which we didn't discuss last time, and no one's brought it up, but I'm assuming this comes out of the Secretary of State's office, is enforcement of known voter fraud. If we were to actually pursue some voter fraud that we know might exist, I think that would clearly deter others from messing around with the system and making it as fraud-free as possible so that voters really feel confident in what's being done and what the process is. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that real quick, and this is not because we think that there's widespread voter fraud. There's obviously no evidence of that. But the problem is when you have people out there that's like, I know of this instance, and see them complaining about it, out in public, it erodes the integrity of the election, right? So dealing with those problems that we might actually know about and pursuing them, and if people see us doing that, that helps to protect the integrity of our election. Agreed. So, and that's just one other commentary on elections in general and whatnot. But I think that helps to protect the integrity of the election, if we do pursue those rare instances we do know of.
Right, agreed.
Good. Thank you. I added that to the list here.
Thank you,
that
Madam Chair.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't have that on there before. I don't know why.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
That comes out of the Secretary of State's office, does it not, for seeking out and identifying people who might be handling?
No, I think it's the Attorney General's office.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay.
But we can talk about how that might.
I just think
work.
once or twice people might pay attention and quit fooling around.
Even shaming.
That'd be good.
So
stand out with a billboard.
Yeah.
We're happy
All
to
right.
see that, Madam Chair, whenever the committee wants to hear about it.
Yeah, I want to just kind of talk about the general concept first of it, and I noted that as one of the issues that we should address. So I'll go to Lila.
Thank you. Lila Richardson with the League of Women Voters. Paul Burns described the fact that the League was one of the signatories to the list of recommendations that he submitted at the beginning of the process. And he's really gone over the major points that we're concerned about. We're very, very supportive of any system that helps more voters participate in the process, which we think is absolutely one of the most important things that Vermonters can do is to participate in the elections and make their voices known. The question about how this relates to education is really important to the League. The League is very involved with voter education in a nonpartisan way, with trying to support people by getting information about the various candidate forums widely available. I do think that having this system where people are mailed their ballots helps to have an important education function, because it makes people aware sometimes of issues or candidates they hadn't thought about that much. It gives them time to research what their options are in races that they might not have, focused on before. There's a lot of information out there. It's a good time frame for people to get the ballots at the beginning of the period and to have time to do that. And we think it worked very well under, as Paul said, very, very difficult circumstances of the pandemic. We'd like to see the system be made permanent.
Great. Thank you. Audrey, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Committee members, thank you for your time and attention. This is such a near and dear to my heart, but also to the work that I do. The National Vote at Home Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan entity that works on this exact issue. And it's not often that I actually get to come to a state and say, you should make the jump and you should mail ballots to everyone. Not everyone has the really spectacular foundation, security processes, dedicated clerks, and all of that ecosystem that serves as the foundation for an elections system that can work in this way. So hats off to the Secretary of State and the clerks and you all for making that happen. So that is my recommendation. I think you should keep the policy. It works. It is secure. It is more accessible. It is safer from a health perspective. And year over year, long term, you actually start seeing large cost benefits as you don't have to replace as much equipment, things like that. And the security aspects are just currently under the technology that we have are just unbeatable. Paper ballots are great, and they make sure that our most important institutions are secure. So, and to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, Senator White, to talk about people participating civically is so important. And these sorts of policies, they actually pull people farther down the ballot. So you start seeing higher rates of voting all the way at it, whatever the sort of last question on your ballot might be. And so you're seeing that people are spending more time thinking about issues, being critical of what does their government look like, how do they want to express their voice in that government. And we are just so thrilled to see the things that Vermont has done to make this successful. But we want to stress that some of the other issues that that this committee has been discussing recently are important to not only to secure the process, but make it more accessible. Just mailing someone a ballot is not always enough. Things like the cure processes and ballot tracking, all of those pieces will fit together to make the gears of this machine work in a way that is most effective. And we're just so happy to lend our support and be here to take any questions or be supportive in any way that might cross your mind. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll jump to the parties. Martha, are you here? There you are.
Yes, thank you all for inviting me and for taking up these issues. I don't think I have very much to add that hasn't already been said. I completely agree with Paul Burns' remarks and some of the other remarks that have been made. I think it was highly successful. I think people like it when something works in government and works for them and gives them more options. And I think the only reason to change it would be if there had been a bad experience and we needed to fix it in some way. But I think people like the continuity and they don't like it when government keeps changing the procedures and rules all the time. I'm a tax preparer, so I notice it a lot in that field. But no, I would say that it worked very well. We should keep it.
Great, thank you. Bruce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bruce Olson, Vermont Democratic Party. We certainly and strongly support vote by mail, primarily because it increases voter participation and as a consequence makes our democracy stronger. But at the same point, we want to maintain the ability of voters to vote in person. We know that for many people, that's a time-honored tradition that they want to maintain. And if we can do it safely, hopefully after this pandemic is behind us, we want to continue that. But vote by mail certainly gives working families, it gives the elderly, it gives people that live far away from polling places a greater opportunity to participate in the process. We think that's a good thing. Our only criticism really of the vote by mail that we saw in this last election was there was no curing process. And that's a real frustration for a voter when they're legally registered to vote and then they make one mistake on their ballot and then their ballot doesn't count. And we think that that can be corrected fairly easily. As this question about fraud, we did not see anything that indicated there was any fraud in the vote by mail election that we just had. We felt that was free of fraud. It increased participation, and with a curing process, it'll work a lot better. We do want to send a thank you to the town clerks and to the Secretary of State's office who implemented this almost on the fly. This is, as people have pointed out, something that a year ago we weren't even thinking about, and we were able to very successfully implement it because of the clerks in the Secretary of State's office. So other things, I would just echo what Paul Burns said. We really, I think, hit the nail on the head as to all the reasons why we should do this, and we'd be happy to work with this committee in the legislature to make sure that we can implement vote by mail going forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So clerks. Or let's go to VLCT first. You might be more specific. VLCT.
Sorry. Yeah, we're here to back up the clerks, to be honest with you, and we're not talking about local elections. So I think we don't have necessarily a position on this, more so that if this were to become common practice, that the clerks have just as much, excuse me, help and resources that were given this go around, because I think that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's why it was so successful. So, if everyone works as a team, as it has been the last year, things work out well. So we're here to support what the clerks say, and anything that they need, we'll stand behind. But we don't actually have a position to hold on this, but because it doesn't impact local elections as you're referring to. But it's been a success, and from all we've heard from the clerks, the Secretary of State's office was excellent. The public education was excellent, and that's what we need to continue to do moving forward.
All right, thank you. Clerks, Carol?
So, we haven't polled the membership of the association, but looking at what the responses were like pre and post November, I think that the majority of clerks really supported it. There were some clerks who were concerned about the loss of local control and local involvement with regards to mailing out ballots, but personally, I don't want to mail 6,000 ballots out myself. But I do know that that is a concern that some of the clerks have. Most of my concerns are process related, which means they're fixable, or can be addressed. It's been mentioned before, talking about, cleaning up the checklist, consistent information on the checklist, particularly with regards to how voters can access my voter page, the need for the information to be consistent so they can get onto there, possibly tying into the national change of address system so that we can keep our mailing addresses as up to date as possible. Codifying the processes associated with voters who choose to vote their ballot, but then bring their voted ballot to the polls, making sure that we're using the right process for that. How to handle ballots that are returned as undeliverable. What's the best way to deal with that? Is there a way to reprocess them? How should we handle those? We talked about, just earlier this afternoon, we talked about ways to mesh together local and general elections, and yet what would the impact be if we were trying to hold a local election at the same time as a general election? Would our local election ballots have to be mailed by us? They would clearly have to be mailed to everybody. And how would that work out? What would that kind of a process look like? There's a pretty significant culture shift with regards to clerks, in that we'd be seeing a lot more pre-election work and hopefully less work on election day with less people coming through the door. And culture shifts can always be a little problematic. But as I said, 99% of that is process related, and those things can be addressed.
Great. Thank you, Carol. John?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for, already had a bit of a conversation about, considering this issue without, and as far as the concerns about the structure of the schools do, that doesn't preclude a greater conversation about cooperating. I'm glad there's some daylight there. I'm also glad there's some daylight in terms of maybe moving back some of those filing deadlines a little bit to give us more room again for town meetings. And those were my two personal biggest concerns about this entire question, because having gone through it, it went really well. November was a lot easier for us than August, which was the postcard driven one. Now, with us, the big change was workflow, obviously, and those were two different, and this one we're coming up now. I've got, we're doing mail-in voting for town meeting day. All my ballots just hit today. That's 2.5 weeks out as opposed to, the previous election. So I think the full piece of information, that would be available would, come after crossover when it's too late to get that, but having said that, people seem to like it. I would just say, the different clerks can have even dramatically different workflows. So I think it would be very important to keep the issue somewhat fluid or dynamic, or at least, stay in touch as this develops, as this go on. I think it will create some real change if this really gets set in a long-term way to some of the way the clerks operate. And so I think that'll be an ongoing discussion that comes right back around to what Gwen was saying, and that's resources. I think resources. That's a big part of how this worked, was that we had the resources to support us. And without those resources, it gets to be a much more challenging conversation.
Good. Okay, thank you. So now, what I think we'll do is go to the Secretary of State's office, and I'm going to ask this question, kind of two questions. First of all, a very simple question that just requires a yes or no answer. Do you support continuing to do mail out balloting for the general election? And the second part then is, assuming that you do, which of the issues that have been brought up and that need to be statutorily defined, and which of them are just in that group of things that say that you'll work with the town clerks? I'm not sure how to put that, but there are some things that we need to do, and then some things that we need to give you and the town clerk's authority to do. And what we need to know is what we need to do. Did that make any sense to anybody?
A little bit. Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as the first question goes, the answer is a very clear yes, and it's really gratifying to hear all of the support. So much harmony on a committee discussion about a bill is really great to see. I won't go into much more. You asked for a yes or no question. Yes or no answer. The answer is a definite yes. I have a little bit more to say if the chair would allow it.
Yeah, I suppose.
About why, and I thank you for that. Just because, we said all through the 2020 elections, vote by mail was going to be safe, simple, and secure. We tried to make it catchy and have people remember that voter education piece was so important. So safe, simple, secure, sign, seal, and send your ballot. Well, I'm going to add a fourth S to that. It was safe, simple, secure, and a success. And that's why I think we're talking about it the way that we are today. People had a really powerful and positive experience with that. And as was said by multiple others just before me, we achieved a record-shattering voter participation in the midst of a pandemic. And we accomplished all the goals that we set out for. We sent a ballot to every active registered voter. It wasn't an easy process, and we couldn't do it the same way again. It's actually close to a miracle that we were able to pull it off with the resources that we had. And that was thanks to the really hard work of our elections division, our smallest in the nation elections division, the really hard work and wonderful partnership that we developed with the town clerks. We were constantly on the line with a group of clerks to figure out the best way to do this. And that goes to the second part of your question, I think, is there are a lot of things that I think we can work through administratively just with the clerks, continuing that partnership. We've grown together over the last year and kind of been through battle together, and I think are working together more effectively than I can ever remember us doing so in the past. So that's a really good sign for what's to come. As Paul pointed out and some others pointed out, Vermonters overwhelmingly embraced voting by mail. Over 75% of Vermonters voted early. Those are just plain amazing numbers. And this election was one of the smoothest elections that we've ever seen. It really came off without a hitch. It was amazing for how worried we were, how many things we thought could go wrong, pulling off vote by mail in less than a year. So post November, we've received a lot of shifts in opinion, accolades for the management and oversight of a really safe, secure, and accessible election. We had a number of folks in the legislature who were opposed and now have kind of come around to see the benefits of vote by mail. we had the governor kind of wanting us to wait and see and wasn't sure about vote by mail. And now he's fully on board and recommending it for March town meetings. There were some clerks who had questions and some that still do, but I think we're seeing more support there than we did. And a lot of that thanks should also go to all those partners who are on the call who did that voter education and really got the word out and made sure people knew how to return their ballots, knew where to return their ballots, and had a successful experience. So bottom line is people liked it. People liked it a lot. And we know that this experience shows that voting by mail has a future here in Vermont. We think it ought to be a permanent fixture after crushing those participation records. And the Secretary of State has always been of the view that our democracy is stronger and more representative when more people vote. And it's worked well for decades in other states. It can work really well here. We saw it work well in 2020. So now to the things that I think we've already talked about putting in a bill, I think go with this vote by mail discussion. And as you've worked through that list, we've already checked off a bunch of those. I think that 30-day early processing is really important, and we have broad agreement on that. And because we had that early processing available, that's what made it so smooth. That's what made us be able to report all of our results, or 95%, 97% of our results on election night, and didn't become an issue like it did in other states. So that 30-day early processing is a really big piece of this that we want to see codified. Drop boxes, the use of drop boxes, and I think I would add to that outdoor polling places.
That's in there.
That's in there. We've covered that, and I think that you've authorized us to start talking to Ameren about that. That's another one that we really wanted to make sure was in there. Sorry, there's just a couple more. And now we have, I think, broad agreement on central mailing coming out of the Secretary of State's office, which is a real key piece of this. And the ballot curing is the other piece that we've had some conversation around that I think is really important to make vote by mail as successful as possible. So we've got those pieces. The one piece that I would add is an additional position for the Secretary of State's office. You've heard a lot of people talk about having the appropriate resources to pull this off. And again, we were very fortunate that we have such a dedicated elections team, because we asked things of them that we never should have asked of any state employee. The hours they put in, the weekends that they put in, the family time that they gave up, the vacations that they gave up for nearly 9 or 10 months straight was just more than we ever should have asked of anyone. And so we can't go through it that way again. We have to have another position for the Secretary of State's office in order to move to vote by mail successfully and still keep Will Senning from turning in his resignation letter. And then the last piece for us all, I think, to really think hard about is that vote by mail is wonderful. It gets more people involved in the process, but it does come at a cost. Those mailings come at a cost. So that's one of the things that we really need to think about is what that will cost and what that future funding source for the mailing of all those ballots and the processing of all those ballots includes. And that also includes some resources for the clerks themselves who, with those resources, can run a more successful election. So I guess in closing, one other thing I did want to mention is that we need to be laser focused on the accuracy of the checklist. And people have brought that up as well, that we're going to have to take more time and more attention paid to making that checklist and those mailings as accurate as they possibly can be. We learned a lot, and I think we cleaned up those checklists a lot in 2020, but there's always more work to be done. We want to make sure that those things are accurate and that those ballots are going to the right place. So I guess to round it out, voting by mail is safe, simple, secure, and was a success. And voting as the foundation of our democracy, we need to do everything that we can to ensure that every eligible voter who wishes to cast a ballot and can. So giving them that option of voting by mail, of dropping off at a drop box, of coming in and voting early, or still being able to come and vote at a polling place is just something that we really should do, and we should give that option to our voters. So we fully support moving ahead with a bill to make it a permanent fixture in Vermont. And I want to say thank you to this committee for all the work that you've done to support us in this. We couldn't have done it without that. Thank you to all the folks on the line, the clerks especially, all of the stakeholders who did a great job of working with us and getting the word out to Vermonters. It's really gratifying to come out on the other end of this and have it have been such a success and see the groundswell of support for making this a permanent thing. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Will, you want to add some stuff?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
No, please do.
Although, thank you, Chris, that Deputy Secretary Winters just did a really nice job summarizing some of this stuff. That's why he gets paid the big bucks. More eloquent than I will be. I'll try to be close, and I'll try to be brief too, because I think we've covered a lot of this ground, thankfully. I want to first just say thanks to everybody for your kind words. Again, I really do appreciate it, for myself and the rest of my staff who dug in as much as I did. And I just wanted to say in that regard that there's been a lot of praise on myself, my team, and the clerks, all rightfully so. I want to give a little praise to Secretary Condos, who showed decisive leadership at the beginning. I don't do anything without his approval and authority, and decisions had to be made and made quickly, and then advocated for. And I thought he really stepped up. Also, I wanted to note and remind it. So one thing that Paul mentioned, I wanted to go back to, which is that other states who have stood up vote by mail systems and how long they have spent doing so, 5, 6, 3, 4 years perfecting it, and getting all the processes and pieces put in place together. And the fact that we didn't have that luxury last year, but I think that, and that was one of the reasons why we advocated for the approach that you guys have taken, which is not to bite off more than we can chew at this time, but to do what we think is doable right now to move us to continue that policy, expand it, make it better over time. And I think the committee, with what we've talked about just today and kind of landed on as a universe of moving forward, has really threaded that needle appropriately at this point. I think what you're suggesting we can do, and we can do before 2022. And then we should and can have discussions about further ways to improve the system going forward, right? It's like anything else. Over time, we'll make it better and serve our Vermont voters better all the time as we do so. So to more specifically answer your second question, Senator White, which is what Chris did a good job of already. I think, at least from my mind, we have good consensus on the general concept of sending out the ballots for the general election to all active voters. To remind the committee, you're talking about 450,000 voters. That those ballots will be returned directly to the clerk's offices. That's a big decision that you guys made that I think is the right one. Again, in terms of taking just the steps that are appropriate right now. A lot of the states that do vote by mail do some form of central processing where they're brought back to more central locations and counted in more volume. And I have never advocated for that and don't now. So I think having these set up to be returned to the clerks is what makes sense for Vermont right now. Having the postage paid in both directions. So obviously we pay the postage going out, but we want those return envelopes to be pre-postage paid and addressed back to the clerks to make it as easy as possible for people to return the ballots. And drop boxes. And I think the message that I have previously gotten from the committee is we're going to do some basic requirements around drop boxes and leave a lot of the security and accessibility standards to either guidance or rulemaking done by the Secretary of State. I've already reached out to my colleagues in a lot of the states that have drop boxes and have gotten a flood of useful information about policies in place in those states. So drop boxes. And then, excuse me, the early processing is the big one. And that is intimately tied with the opportunity to cure. And the basic parameters I have in my head so far coming out of the committee is that we would allow the clerks to do the early processing for 30 days. And when we talk about that, the step that's not allowed now that would be during that time is actually opening the certificate envelope and feeding the ballot into the tabulator or ballot box. That is what Carol was talking about, that is the front end work, but then that ends up not being the back end work on election day where that otherwise would be taking place. It also enables us to get down to a greater level of ability to address almost all the reasons that a ballot could be defective by enabling the clerks to open up, take the ballots out and process them in the tabulator or ballot box. So I think expanding that is optional, right? You're keeping that as a choice the clerk can make about to what degree they want to process ballots. But I made this point in our last session, and I'll make it again, that if you pair that, of course, with the requirement that I would suggest at this point, that the clerk needs to, within 72 hours, make a determination of whether the ballot is defective or not, that's where you're putting the new burden on the clerks, because that requires action at a time that they don't have control over, that could be as early as 30 days. Could be as late as the day before too. It depends when they receive a ballot. But as soon as they're receiving a ballot, they're then on the clock to take action on that ballot. And as we've talked about, it's really the only way to have a meaningful opportunity to cure and a fair one to all voters across towns. So then we discussed it. We kind of, the discussion, I don't think completely completed itself last time about at what point you stop requiring, I'll back up, that the notification that would result from that review process would be a postcard mailing, and that the Secretary of State's office will develop these postcards that the clerks hopefully have sitting in a little easy to access place on their desk, pre-posted, that when they determine a ballot's defective, they quickly address the postcard and send it in the mail to the voter at that time. We had discussed also that voters, and I think the way I would probably suggest this happens is that it's specific on their absentee ballot application for that election, if they have one, that they would take that notification by phone call or text message or email if they provide that information to the clerk. I'd be curious Carol's thoughts about that, because I think part of the idea too was that I think it'd almost be easier for the clerks to just send a postcard than try and be making phone calls and writing emails if the postcards are there and ready and pre-posted. So I think we'd want to write it in such a way that it could be up to the clerk what means of notification they use, and that they could use one of those others if provided. They also could just decide to do a postcard to everybody if that's the easiest thing for them, but they have to notify everybody. And so if they don't have the information, they have to send the postcard. Then there was the discussion of when that necessity to send a postcard might stop in advance of the election, given the mailing times. I think 10 days had been talked about. I personally think that even at 10 days, you could put a postcard in the mail to a Vermonter and it'll be there within 3 days and give them a meaningful chance to come cure a ballot. So the more I had thought about it, I thought that that might move closer to, say, 5 days before the election. And Senator White, I do not know the level of detail you wanted me to get into now, but you asked the appropriate question, right, of what you address in the statute and what you don't. Yep. And I'm trying to get to the ones I think you probably would address in the statute. And then if you leave the details of how those are addressed up to the clerks and I and Amarin, and then you guys take a look at what we present and say, no, I want 7 days. No, I want 3 here. That makes sense to me if it does to you.
Yeah, I think that's where because we need to get to the actual things that need to be in statute and have Amarin the ability to draft them up so that then we can make sure that we're talking about the same thing. And if there are things that need to be in the statutes that we didn't address,
right,
that you need to bring
I'll
that
get to
up
a couple of
too.
those because there are
Okay.
a couple of those, I think. But there are a couple too that I think would be better dealing with administratively. And I guess I'll say to you in general, there's a lot that needs to be addressed outside of what we're talking about in the details of this. Of course, that was all I went through last year, but none of it's worthy of putting into statute, I don't think.
Okay.
Carol talked about how you handle undeliverable ballots that come back to you. And I think that might be worth putting in statute also. And I think that could be part of, and I haven't thought this through entirely, the other part of the curing and defective ballot conversation that we had is sort of appropriate recording of that information in our election management system. And I want to simplify the categories, Carol, of return, right? It should just be that it's returned and counted, it's returned and defective, and possibly a third would be returned and undeliverable. So that I, as a voter, I'm sitting here, I haven't gotten my automatic ballot yet, and I can go and check my voter page and say, oh, it went back to the clerk undeliverable. I got to get down there and see what the problem with the address was, or vote in person at the office. Try and simplify those categories and put into statute that that's part of the action they need to take. So they need to, when they make the determination, say it's defective, they need to put the postcard in the mail or notify the voter by the other means if they choose to and have them, and mark in the election management system the status of that ballot return, putting in that it was one of those three that I just talked about, and that happens in that same 32-hour period too. Hopefully there's less instances of those undeliverable ballots, and it gets to the discussion about the checklist, but I think many of the clerks have used the information that they got from ballots coming back to them to make informed decisions about challenging voters going forward. And if we're just doing it to active voters, they aren't going to get mailed a ballot if they're a challenged voter, and that's not going to get bounced back to the clerk. So hopefully there's less of that, but there will always be some of it, and it's important to address it. The other one, Carol, I forget, I don't think you had flagged this one, but it came up a lot, and I think it might be worth actually putting in the statute also, is a statement about how you handle people who register after the mailing goes out. And I think that those should potentially be put into two baskets, which is that if it's a true first-time registrant for the first time in Vermont, you go ahead and automatically send a ballot to that person, because you're not worried that there's already been a ballot sent to them in the statewide mailing that happened however long before that. But if instead they were previously registered in another town and are moving to your town, that I would like to craft some language that says a ballot isn't sent to that person until the status of the ballot that was previously sent by the state is determined. Either they bring it back and here's my Barton ballot. You can see it's unvoted, and then they can contact the Barton clerk and say, take them off your list and take their absentee activity away, whatever it might be, but just to determine that it's not out there, hasn't been returned in the past town. And I'm happy to talk with Carol more about the details of how we would phrase that. But that caused a lot of confusion and concern on the part of the clerks, knowing that a ballot may have been issued in the previous town. I'm getting there. First time registrants, movers, cure. I think I've covered most of it, Senator White. I wanted to note a couple things though in terms of comments that have been made. Yeah, on the voter checklist, number one, that last year made a lot of progress on the voter checklist. Number two, that we're finally getting engaged with this group, Eric, that I've told you all about over the spring and summer this year for further cleaning of the checklist. And yesterday I had a conversation with some folks advocating for the possible expansion of automatic voter registration to some of the social service agencies, particularly Medicaid. And the fact that that might move us forward in terms of more frequent address updates to Medicaid recipients who are already registered on the checklist, which was making sense to me when we were having that conversation yesterday. They visit their Medicaid provider more frequently than the DMV even, for instance. So that's constantly on our mind, updating the voter checklist and making it more accurate. Last, in terms of the pursuance of voter fraud, I think that the phrase used, and I'm not being defensive here at all, was known cases of voter fraud. And my answer to that is if I am really presented with evidence of a known actual voter fraud, I will forward that to the Attorney General's office. The Ben mentioned sort of public proclamations of it. If I really saw a public proclamation that was actual voter fraud, I would follow up with that person and try and contact them and say, what are you talking about? Do you have evidence of this? A lot of the voter fraud proclamations that we saw last year were ballots being delivered to residences for either previous residents or deceased persons, et cetera. And we just, continued to make the point, it's not voter fraud until somebody picks up that ballot, perjures themselves on the envelope, and sends it back to the clerk. And if I hear about that, I'm reporting it to the Attorney General's office. But that was a side issue. I really appreciate the common ground that the folks in this room have reached on vote by mail. I think it is smart policy. I can't tell you the number of people who've contacted me and said, I don't typically vote, but because the ballot was sent and put in front of me and put in my living room, yeah, I filled it out and sent it back, and it felt great. And I had no idea it was that easy. And those are the feel-good stories. And that's why we saw the crushing of the voter turnout records that we saw in November. So if you think I've accurately kind of framed up how we're moving forward, then I look forward to bringing back some pen on paper and starting to parse through the details.
Thank you. That's Senator Clarkson.
That was great. That was great. The whole thing was terrific. It was wonderful to listen to, and just such an extraordinary effort. Two questions. One, we have a specific number, and I just need a reminder of how many people actually voted. We got 73%. What was the 73% actual number? It was at 328? No, it was more than that.
370.
So that's more than 73% if you're looking at 450. 370. Okay, great. And my other question is, how many did we actually how many effectively did we take off the checklist as a result of the work around the postcard and the primary?
I can't answer that yet. And
we can't. Okay.
Part of the reason is you're primarily not just taking those people off, you're sending them the notice letter.
You're
putting them on
challenging.
notice. Yep.
Okay, and you're challenging them. So you were, and do we know how many that is?
No, I mean, I could tell you how many, I would have to get back to you. I could tell you how many have been challenged since the general election. Those aren't necessarily all because of the postcards, but it would still be informative to you.
Yeah, I think it would be. I think that would be helpful for us, because when we're talking about improving the checklist, it would be interesting for us to know how effective this incredible effort, what it resulted in terms of how many additional challenged vote people. That would be great. Thanks.
And Senator Clarkson, just on a couple of those numbers, I don't want to leave them out there. I want people to be clear that the 75-ish% was of people who actually voted, so voted by mail.
No,
so,
I got that. It was that 73% of the total check of the registered voters had voted, I thought.
No. So the total number of voters are somewhere around 500,000.
Oh.
The 75% was of those 370,000 who voted, 75% of them voted by mail.
Right, I got that. But the total number of people who voted were 5. No, we have, I thought you testified that there were 450,000 people on our checklist.
Those were active voters after you pull out
right. Okay.
Of about 40 to 50,000 challenged voters, people on the challenge list.
And okay. Great.
But
perfect.
I'm sorry, 370 is about 75% of 490 of our total universe of voters. Then there were 370,000 ballots cast this year. That's 75% of our total universe of voters.
It's great. So I would just like to, point of personal gratitude. I did have a constituent that Will and Chris were very generous in working with, who had thought there was fraud, and ended up sort of disappearing because it was one of those issues. It was other town or somebody who died. It was not a fraud issue per se. It was a ballot going to another address, or to somebody who'd moved. I can't remember what it ended up being, but it wasn't fraud. Thank you.
Welcome.
So I'm going to ask the committee if they have any questions or concerns or anything about this, and then we'll try to get this written up in a draft form. But first, I just want to acknowledge that the issue of putting more burden, and I acknowledge that that is what we're doing here by requiring town clerks to send out some kind of a postcard or some kind of a notification to people who have a defective ballot returned. But I'd like to point out I think, Paul, you sent this to everybody? He did an analysis of what that meant for each town. And I don't know if everybody got that, but it tells there on how many towns received defective ballots and how many they received, and the kind of burden that we would be putting on the town clerks. And it clearly is more of a burden in a larger town but Paul, did you send that to everybody?
It's posted on our website, I think.
Okay.
Isn't that the missive you sent where everybody signed it at the bottom?
No,
no.
This is
Okay.
This is more recent, and I'm not sure that everybody got that, Senator
I'm
White.
sorry. Okay.
If you could both send that to everybody and also to Gail to post it on the website, because it gives numbers of, and I'm not sure if it's every town, but it gives numbers of in different towns how many defective ballots, what that would mean in terms of sending out a postcard. And in many towns, it meant nothing. There weren't any returned. And in some there were 5 and in some 10. So it isn't as if we're asking every town clerk to send out 250 postcards. So I thought that was very instructive.
I'll send that information to Gail and to the full committee.
Thank you. Thank you. So committee, Will.
Quick comment. I think that's very useful data. I want to note it's only as is reported to us by the clerk. So
yeah,
I put that note on there. And I wanted that discussion though made me think of something, and Carol and John, if you're listening. Does the committee want to give me any direction on how we would treat clerks with way less than regular office hours? So I would probably suggest some language that said within 72 hours or the next time you have regular office hours, potentially. Say the ballot lands on a Wednesday, you're not going to ping them if they're not in until the next Monday.
Yeah, I think you need to have that flexibility. Because we don't want town clerks to feel that they have to every day go in and check their mail if they.
Do I have to be checking? That was the questions you would get. Yeah.
So do committee members have any questions or comments or anything to any of the people who've spoken to us or about any of the issues right now?
Nope.
Senator Polina? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to add my kudos to Will and Chris for all the work they've done. It's really incredible achievement. You know, others have said it, but I feel a need to make it clear that I really appreciate what they've done.
Thanks.
I have to say that if you're doing this for the 2022 election and it's you 5 and you have one more person, you're going to feel like you're on vacation because you're going to have so much time to prepare and do it.
Right.
We got to get redistricting done between now and then too, by the way.
That's going to be a fun one. We know where Southern Vermont is going to be, down to Massachusetts. Any other committee members want to add their thoughts or concerns, or anybody else? I don't see any hands waving. So what I would say is Amron and Will and whoever needs to here, if it's possible, to have, tell me if this is possible, to have some kind of a draft by Wednesday of next week?
Given the holiday, that might be a little difficult.
What holiday?
Monday is a state holiday.
Oh. I forgot.
I know, that's because we never get it.
Right. And if we had an election day holiday, we wouldn't get that either.
We only have holidays when we don't go shopping or interact with the public at all.
Let's see. So given that, would it make more sense for us to switch some days next week then and do elections on a different day? Could we do that, you think, by Friday?
Yes.
Is that reasonable?
Haven't we just switched everybody to, next week, right?
No, next week. So
I'm looking at Amarin. I mean,
yeah, I am too.
It's hard to know until we're in it how long it's going to. I would say Friday is a possibility. I would say the next week is more comfortable, but we can see how far we can get, certainly.
Not this Friday.
Right.
No, next Friday. And I think the Secretary of State might have some language already around some of these.
a possibility too that comes to mind would be maybe we have enough done to discuss what we have done next week. If it's not everything, but it's enough for a session on Thursday or Friday would be preferable to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can certainly have enough for the committee to discuss at that point.
Let's aim for Friday then. Gail, you and I will have to meet and make some changes here, but let's aim for Friday then. And we'll do as much as we can, and hopefully everybody will be with us again so that we can look at the details. And the way we tend to do these is if we have the draft and we're going through them, if we're all in agreement on an issue, we'll just check that issue off. We're not going to talk about it again. There's no point if we're all in agreement. And so if the majority of the committee agrees on, and then we'll look at the bill as a whole afterwards. Okay? That work for everybody?
Yep, that sounds terrific. And I just want to point out that Ben Kingsley is in the crest running here. He's added another quite beautiful crest.
I know, I see that. I don't know what that is.
We're going to go from pick photos. That's like yesterday. Now we're into crests. Now.
That's high praise. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, Carol's is pretty rocking.
I don't think I can compete with Carol's. I'll be honest.
Okay. So
see, the competition is on.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be getting up crests. So anything else, committee, that we need to?
No, I think this was good work today.
All set.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.